I'm looking at minor prophets here, the 12th video, fall semester 2021. Looking at the book of Micah. You already have this screen here, but this is the first screen of the book of Micah. And last week we looked at Micah more in a technical sense, not necessarily content, but for teaching the principles of the content, but teaching you that you can narrow down some of the dates of the books of the Bible by events taking place in them. We talked about, he preached in the days of Uzziah, or not Uzziah, but Uzziah's son, Jotham, who came on the scene. So his ministry had to start after Jotham became king. And he preached during the time of Hezekiah, when Sennacherib wanted to go against Jerusalem. So it tells us that somewhere maybe 35-year period, someone like that Micah preached at. And it narrows it down for us, gives us a good understanding. That way, if you know the date of a book of the Bible, then you can know the context a lot easier. This is way before the Babylonian captivity, so it's not talking about Nebuchadnezzar, it's not talking about anything like that. And that helps a lot to fully understand and appreciate what all God has done for us in these books. He prophesied during a period of strife. There was a lot of sin going on. Not only in the northern kingdom had been taken captive in 721 by Assyria. But even in the south, you had a lot of spiritual lethargy. That's what we see today. Apathy. People really don't care. Are you a Christian? Yes, I'm a Christian. Well, what do you believe about? I just don't get into all that stuff, and I don't want to talk about it. And well, where do you go to church at? Well, at the time, somebody in our church was witnessing. Maybe even the pastor was witnessing somebody, and asked them where they go to church at. And they said, well, they go to Gospel Light at the time. And they said, Pastor Phil, who's the pastor? And they said, well, we just got a new pastor. At that time, the pastor, the Gospel Light was Bob Robertson, had been there 50 years. And we just got a new pastor, and our pastor said, well, Bob Robertson's been there 50 years. Where do you go to church now? Well, we used to go there, kind of thing. And, I remember witnessing somebody up here on Pleasant View one time, and when the house, and I asked them if they were a Christian. I just started witnessing. I don't ask people if they're Christians anymore. I ask them if they ever accepted Christ. And I asked them if they're a Christian. I remember one said, well, I am a Christian, but I just don't let it affect my life. And I was a brand new Christian. I didn't really know what to say at that point. Now I got a lot to say about that point. But, how can you be a Christian and it not affect your life?
Yeah, tell me about it. If you are a Christian, it will affect your life.
When Romans 10:9 says, if thou shalt confess with thy mouth, that means it's going to naturally come out. It's not going to, you have to force it to come out. You've talked to people that you just met before in the past, maybe at a restaurant or somewhere, that within just a minute or so into the conversation, you knew that they were a believer. And they didn't even hardly say anything about being a believer. You just knew it, and so you asked them, you're a believer? Yeah, I'm a believer. Because they knew you were. Why is that? Because the Holy Spirit bears witness to one another. And so we can tell somebody many times is a believer. There's other times, I remember my wife was witnessing somebody at work, and invited her to church and all this stuff, and the woman says, well, I'm a Christian. And my wife knew her for like 20 years. And my wife said, well, you're a Christian? My wife said, I didn't know that. And she said, well, I go to church all the time. My wife said, well, I've never noticed that you're a Christian. And she didn't try to mean it sarcastically to her. And she was like dumbfounded. She thought, wait a minute, you're a Christian? It don't make sense, because I've known you all this time and you've never said anything about the Lord or anything like that.
Her behavior.
She probably had went with a member of a church somewhere but wasn't Christian. And a lot of people base their testimony on that they joined a church. I remember a guy hit my car when I was in college, and I was talking to the policeman afterward, and I got alone there, and I said, asked him if he died tonight, we spent eternity. And he looked at me, he said, well, my grandfather helped build the Green Street Methodist Church. And I thought, okay, what's that got to do with anything?
Yeah.
You know, your granddad could have been the Pope, or it could be whoever. It could be, you know, it could be Billy Graham for all I care. It don't make any difference. Well, that's the problem. People have that apathy and hypocrisy. Like I said, a lot of people today, you know, I know of church in this area, and I don't know how many churches are in Winston-Salem. I'm guessing 500, 600.
More than that.
Yeah, probably more than that. But then, in reality, there's not nearly that. There's not nearly that many. There's a lot of them call themselves churches, whose pastor is not qualified to pastor. They don't preach the truth. They preach lies about some strange things. So in reality, they're not churches. They just call themselves churches. And so when somebody starts a church around here, one of my students started a church in Pinnacle, not too far from here. And my first thought is, do we need another church around here? Then I realized, you know, if that's what he believes God called him to do, that's what he needs to do. Because there are a lot of buildings here that call themselves churches, but the reality of it is there's a lot of more fake churches in Winston than there are real churches. So I don't know how many.
I know the guy that used to sit there at the Reynolds. He
yeah.
had a little small church on the corner of Akron Drive, I think it was Akron.
Yeah, Akron and Auburn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now does he still have that?
You know, I don't go up that way anymore,
Okay.
but I know that he was there for a while, and he left it in Woodrow, Ireland. I don't know if y'all know him. He started pastoring it, and his name was on the sign, and then a few months after that I drove by, and Dean Reynolds' name was back on the sign.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if he's still doing that or not.
Well, what about Robert? He used to have a church up in the mountains too.
Robert Cooper?
The one that had the sister that died. Is it
That's
Sam?
Robert. That's Sam.
Sam. Okay, I'm sorry, Sam.
Oh, Sam, yes, he's in Mount Airy.
Okay.
Yeah, he's still pastoring. He's called me a few months ago, we talked.
Oh, good.
But yeah, he's doing real good, if I understand.
Didn't Sam, teach a little while at that Bible college?
Vintage, I think he did.
Yeah, I heard he did too.
I think somebody told me that. Yeah. And there's a couple of my students here, graduates, who's taught over there. Trying to think that one was in. Clara Good?
Oh, yeah, I know. Goes to Morning Star.
I think so.
Little short lady.
Yes.
And her son is in the ministry now singing.
Oh, who's that?
Canaan, he's at Canaan Baptist.
Oh, okay.
Little short guy, Tyrone son.
Okay. Is he the pastor over there?
Oh, I haven't.
He's been up there about 3 years now.
Well, I thought that the guy that used to sing was the pastor over there. They got the sisters that used to sing.
No, he's been gone. He's been gone over 10 years.
Oh,
Talk about Nappa.
Nappa,
No, he's been gone.
All right. The guy, student on Thursday night class, Tony, he'll be listening to this. He listens to all the videos too. He goes to class, he always listens to video. And he said, I like to visit the class because I want to meet everybody, all the students, because I hear them all the time. And I said, well, there's only 3 in the first 2. He said, only 3? He said, it sounds like a bunch of people now. I said, no, that's Priscilla and Sandra for the most part.
And you know, I keep forgetting about that.
I know, he loves it, he loves it. Yeah, he's off work next Monday morning, or the Monday after Thanksgiving, and he was going to come to the class, but we don't have class that day. Anyway, now, we're looking at the book here, Micah, and Sennacherib is now the king of Assyria. He was not the king when they first went in to took the northern kingdom. There's been a few different kings since then: Tiglath-Pileser, Ashurbanipal. Now Sennacherib is the king, and he starts deciding he's going to take Judah as well. And so this is Micah. This one thing that Micah is doing is teaching the people that they need to wake up spiritually. God is going to allow him to come down. And he does come down to not only to take Judah, but I'm sure he wants Edom and Moab and all the other nations as well. So, because Assyria is trying to take over the world at this point, and doesn't realize that, well, 100 years from this is all they have. 606 BC is when they first are destroyed by Babylon. But nevertheless, they do have their sights set on Judah. Hezekiah is the king of Judah at this point, a good king, 13th ruler. And in 701, he decides to subdue Judah. And so he makes his way down, and as he goes, he does start capturing several cities. He captures, his eyes are on Jerusalem, but he captures about 46 other cities in Judah. So Hezekiah does have something to worry about. It's not that the enemy's not going to come down into Israel. He is coming down to Israel. He is coming down into Judah. He's just not going to be able to capture Jerusalem, which of course is his goal, because that's the capital. You capture the capital, you've captured the country. And if you remember, the Hezekiah, they built the pool of Siloam. This is one, New Testament talk about the pool of Siloam. Well, that was built by Hezekiah in order to have fresh water inside the city of Jerusalem without having to go outside. That means if they had fresh water in there, they could have animals in there for food, they can have crops in there, they can be self-sufficient within the city walls, and they can fight off the enemy. So it was a smart thing that God allowed him to do. If you ever look up the way the pool of Siloam was built, they actually started on opposite ends and met in the middle. Today, that's not that difficult because we have laser technology and stuff like that to figure that out. But this was a crooked pool, and how they got to meet in the middle, I have no idea. It was pretty amazing that they were able to do that. But Micah, of course, the prophet here, is from a town of Moresheth. And Moresheth is one of the cities that Sennacherib actually conquers, and killed the people and deported some as slaves. So Micah had a vested interest in this as well. You don't have this material.
Huh?
You don't have this material. Are you looking for it?
Yeah.
Oh no, this is brand new stuff.
Okay, that's why I wasn't right, because I was looking for.
Oh, okay. I looked back and you were flipping. I thought maybe you were
I
right.
can't remember that we didn't have it, so that's the reason I started writing.
Oh,
I can probably pull those screens back for you later on.
okay.
Yeah. But again, Sennacherib had a very strong army, a very large nation, much larger. Remember, they conquered the 10 tribes of the north. And 20 years before this, now they're going to conquer the south. So they're even stronger than they was before. What's harder to do, conquer 10 tribes or 2 tribes? Well, 2 tribes seems much easier. And so he set his sights on them, believing full well that he could win this battle. But you have to remember, the battle's in God's hands.
Amen, thank God. A lot of hours.
So like I say, 46 different cities that he captured, conquered during this invasion. Why in the world I spelled Micah like that? And just spelled that, did an extra H in there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But believe it or not, I wrote it right.
Did you? Yeah, I don't know why I wrote it like that, typed it like that. Must have been the computer messed up. Could
Oh,
be.
yeah.
Could
Oh,
be.
yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Could be. Micah and Isaiah were contemporaries. When you hear that phrase in the Bible, talking about prophets that were contemporaries, it means they lived at the same time.
Okay.
They lived at the same time?
Yeah, at the
Okay.
same time, yeah, and prophesied at the same time. Isaiah prophesied more to the royal household. His prophecies was to the Hezekiah, Manasseh later on. Ahaz before Hezekiah. Ahaz was the father of Hezekiah. Yeah, but Micah's prophecies was directed more to the common people of the land. You know, both needs to be reached. We see very clearly we should preach and minister to the down and outers, but just as much so we should preach to the up and outers as well. You know, Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Richard Branson and all them billionaires, they need Jesus just as much as the bum on the street needs Jesus.
I can't believe Bill Gates is getting a divorce, him and his wife.
Yeah, I mean,
all the money, what do you not, why he's not happy? I don't understand why you can't get him.
remember the guy that was, they said committed suicide in prison, and all that sex trafficking?
Yeah.
Bill Gates was a good friend with him.
Oh, so that had, maybe she found out.
Well, and
about
that's what
stuff.
people are saying. I'm not saying 100% that's what it was,
Yeah.
but when this guy was outed
Mhm.
is when Melinda Gates
Yeah.
found out that Bill had this relationship and had been on the plane many, many times, traveled with this guy many times. That's when their marriage fell apart.
Oh.
It's hard to know exactly what happened.
Right.
And it wasn't one of the royals in England.
Yeah, the one,
Philip?
the princess, Philip, was it Philip?
Was it Philip?
It was.
I think it might have been Philip. He's been accused by some of the victims directly. So, I don't know, it's just amazing what people think. What people have gotten away with.
Yeah.
And
And it's because they're in a different status, they're in a different.
yeah, we're above the law.
High echelon, and,
Yeah.
you know, so
Yeah.
they're up there. We would never have known, just like when we sit in the pool, when we sit in the pews, and we're not a part of the clique of the church.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going on with the
Yeah.
pastor and all the other stuff, because we're just sitting there listening.
One of the things that irritate me in this country, and I hear all the politicians, both sides say it all the time, talking about the middle class and the upper class and all that. We are not in a class system in this country. There is no middle class or upper class or lower class in this country. You can have middle income. England has a class system where the royals, you know, are above the peasants. We don't have that in this country. That's what the revolution was about. We don't want that. I wish they'd quit using the phrase class and use income. If they want to talk about money, you talk about, okay, middle income people, right? Because I'm just as good as Elon Musk or Bill Gates. You know, I'm just as important in this country as they are. But when you use this class, then everybody thinks they're more important. Like my little speech here, that little soapbox. Microgrowth to show Judah that trouble is coming, so you need to act right in justice and in holiness. Of course, Hezekiah was a good king, so the timing was great for them. Who knows what would have happened if Sennacherib had decided to come down a few years before this, when Hezekiah's father was king, a wicked king. Well, actually, that did happen. Not Sennacherib, but others came down to defeat Judah when Ahaz was king, and God sent Isaiah to him to tell Ahaz not to worry, that God was going to protect him. And Ahaz didn't care what God said. In fact, Isaiah in chapter 7, remember, Isaiah told him that not only did God say he was going to protect the kingdom, but God said you can ask for a sign, any sign you want, and God will do it for you. And Ahaz's response was, I don't want no sign. And so He didn't ask for a sign. God did give a sign, Isaiah 7:14, that would not be fulfilled in Ahaz's day, but would be, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a child.
Why didn't he want a sign? That's what I didn't understand.
Why didn't he want?
Why did
I guess he didn't want God to have credit for anything.
Oh my goodness.
You know, and that's the way people are. And Bill Gates and all those top rich people, all of them claim to be atheists. They won't give God credit for anything. Elon Musk now is worth like $330 billion. You know, last year he's worth $100 billion. Now he's worth 300 and some billion. So he feels like he doesn't need God.
Because he did it on his own.
Yeah.
He didn't have to.
And God said something about that, didn't he? What the profit of man if he gained the whole world.
So,
Focus on God's justice was very important to remind the people that God would judge them for their disobedience. And God would be the one to establish the kingdom. So Hezekiah reigned as a godly king, but he wasn't the savior of Judah. God was. And if there's sin in the camp of Judah or Israel before the north, before they conquered, God would allow judgment to take place, and it did. Chapter 1 through 3, Micah talked about the imminent judgment of God upon his people. And God does judge his people. I think sometimes we look at the sin going on in the world today and the hypocrisy in the government and ministries and all this stuff, and we're looking back for God to judge them for all their wickedness. And we forget that judgment comes first to the house of God. So we have a responsibility to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Remember, a lost person is going to sin. That's who they are. The saved person can avoid it. We need not be hypocritical in thinking, well, God should judge all those people. Well, what about ourselves? Make sure that we're doing what God would have us to do as well. Then the coming of the Lord. Isaiah 6 gives a great story there of God in the temple. Isaiah talks about in 6:1, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With twain he covered his face, and twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. And one cried unto the other and said, Holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, the whole earth is full of his glory. So you have here the vision here of the Lord that Isaiah had, living at the same time. Remember, he's contemporary here, Micah. The Lord's going to bring judgment, Micah says. The steps will be like an earthquake bringing judgment. God will tread on the high places. Remember what high places are in the Bible? Anytime in the Old Testament you talk about high places or groves, that was places of idol worship.
Oh, okay.
In fact, God even uses this phrase high places against Israel. Remember Judah, I mean not Judah, but Jerusalem is a city built upon a hill. And I remember when I went in 95, coming from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, we came at night, like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, it seemed like it was. And I can remember riding in a van, not really knowing where I was going, but saw this city up on the hilltop as we approached Jerusalem. And I remember seeing the sign there, and tears came to my eyes, and I thought of the verse, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills from whence cometh my help. And help cometh from the Lord, who made the heaven and the earth. And which was the appropriate place for that, because that's where that song was to be sung at as they approached Jerusalem. It was a psalm of degree. But what had happened, God here was kind of warning them, Jerusalem is on a hill, so it would be considered a high place. And God referred to it as a high place, not because it was a proper place to worship, but because they had made it into an improper place to worship. And so God here was criticizing them of trusting in the temple. It's what happened in the days of Ezekiel. When Ezekiel was in captivity, the people he struggled with probably more than anybody else when he was in captivity was other Jews. The false prophets who were living in Babylon at the time. Because Ezekiel was preaching that we're in captivity, we want to be here 70 years. So unpack your bag, boys, you got a long time here. Where the prophets were saying, don't unpack, we're going back home. Why? Because the temple is back home. So God would not leave us down here when we have a temple. Well, when the news came the city is smitten and the temple was destroyed, then the people went into despair because they were trusting the temple. The temple wasn't going to save them. Right? Having a house of worship, having the temple, by that time, maybe even unknown to them, the Spirit of God had moved out of the temple anyway. Ezekiel gives a description how the Spirit comes out of the ark and finally ascends from the Mount of Olives. So they were trusting in the building, they were trusting in God. And God here's warning them about that. That the temple can be a pagan place of worship if you allow it to be. Our churches could be a pagan place of worship if we allow it to be. Does it do the right thing by keeping the ark from falling off the cart?
I think he meant well.
Yeah, he meant well.
That's what he wasn't supposed to touch it.
Yeah, but he wasn't supposed to touch it, so whether he meant well or not, he did the wrong thing.
He did.
Because we have to do it God's way, or it's wrong. And, while we might have compassion on him and think, he was just trying to do the right thing, it's still wrong.
Where is the Ark of the Covenant now? Does anybody know, Dr.
Nobody knows.
Okay.
If I had to make a guess, and this is a guess, Second Maccabees, there's two books called First, Second Maccabees that are Jewish history books. And Second Maccabees says that what happened was that Jeremiah took the ark and other implements out of the temple and buried them in the Mount of Moses, which would be Mount Nebo, today modern day Jordan. And then after he buried them there, put them in a cave, then God closed the cave up. To me, that would be possible. I mean, that's the most likely scenario. Everything you see on the History Channel, flip over to the Cartoon Network. You get more Bible from that. Because History Channel don't have anything to do with reality. They say the ark's in Ethiopia, and they even show a building where the ark, they say the ark is inside the building, and they got one guard out front who looks like he's 100 years old, standing there with a spear guarding it so nobody can go into it. I mean, the way people are today, that guy had been long dead, and that building would be completely destroyed for them trying to find that ark, and it's not in there. Then there's a museum, I think it's in Ethiopia as well, who claim they have it. And they showed it, and what they did, they said that it was stored in the warehouse of the museum, and they went down these aisles, and there on the shelf was a huge, looked like a boat, a gourd kind of thing, that they said was the ark. Had no, not even close to the biblical description of what the ark. It looked more like the ark that Moses would have been in, the boat ark, not the Ark of the Covenant. And so they said that's the Ark of the Covenant. No, it's not either. Like I said, the only thing that I would tend to think would be right would be Jeremiah put it in Mount Nebo. Now, even then, it don't matter because the Ark doesn't matter. The Ark will never matter again. The Ark, earthly Ark was patterned after the heavenly Ark.
Right.
In the new and millennial kingdom, the heavenly ark will be on the earth. So that's the old ark. The presence of God moved out of the old ark anyway. Even when they rebuilt the second temple, they built another ark and put in it, but it wasn't the ark. And remember in the days of Jesus, you had two high priests, Annas and Caiaphas. Both were wicked men. Well, how could those wicked men go into Holy of Holies and survive being wicked? Well, the ark, God wasn't in the ark anymore. So since the second temple was built, a sinful person could go into the Ark of the Covenant and survive. Because it no longer contained the presence of God. So it didn't make any difference after that. Then in chapter 1, verse 4, the response of nature to the Lord. And the mountains shall be molten under him, and the valley shall be cleft as wax before the fire, and the waters that are poured down a steep place. And God is in control of this world. And when he comes back, that second coming, on Mount of Olives, remember it's going to split in two. Millennial kingdom, it shows evidence of a change in the topography of the earth. Now, what it will go back to, I don't know exactly. Nobody does. I tend to think it'll be more like it was before the flood at that time. Although I would think the continents will still be divided like they are now. Remember, continents divided 100 years after the flood, in the days of Peleg, the Bible says. And so I would think there'll still be continents in the millennial kingdom, but the mountains will lower, the valleys will rise in places. Of course, the tribulation period is going to change the topography of the earth greatly. The tsunamis that take place. If the angels didn't come down and stop the tsunamis and all that, the earth wouldn't have survived. So quite a few changes will take place. And very simply, remember Micah is prophesying during the time of Israel and the time of Judah. Israel is still in 721 before they're taken. Micah's message is to them. It's to both nations. It talks about the sin of Samaria and the sin of Jerusalem. It didn't leave them out, even though they would end up surviving for a while. Another 115 years they would survive. the irony is that Assyria is about to try to capture Judah at this point. But Judah and Assyria both would survive until 606 BC, when both of them are taken captive. Assyria first by the Babylonians, and then Judah by the Babylonians. All right, let's take a little break.